He's mine. He's chosen me. Pazuzu.
The Exorcist was a classic and cult movie in the horror genre, and going for a sequel, especially with such a poor script, was a blasphemous decision in itself. Firstly, both William Peter Blatty, the screenwriter of the first movie, and the original director, William Friedkin, were against a sequel. In fact, the duo had already filed a lawsuit against Warner Brothers over profits and credits. Blatty, whose novel The Exorcist was based on, wasn't even allowed to be a part of the post-production process. And here's where things get even messier. The studio only wanted a sequel because 20th Century Fox had just struck gold with The Omen in 1976. So in typical studio fashion, they rushed to cash in on the success of The Exorcist by forcing out a second part. Both Blatty and Friedkin absolutely hated the idea. Friedkin even said he never wanted to rehash the same material because, for him, The Exorcist wasn't just another horror flick, it was something deeply personal. Also, keep in mind that this is the late 70s, and Hollywood wasn't yet exactly a part of the franchise rat race, so directors like Friedkin saw making a sequel as a step down. Also, in his vision, The Exorcist was complete in itself, and there was no need to drag it. Friedkin admitted that he did try to watch the movie, but claimed it was the worst 40 minutes of any movie he had ever seen. Ouch. He recounted that Exorcist II's screening was so bad that people created a riot and forced the producers to run from the theater. However, Friedkin's anger was too strong to stop here. He went on to dissect the movie gruesomely and directly offended Borman by saying that the movie was made by someone with a stupid, demented mind. Left with no other choice, Point Blank and Deliverance famed filmmaker John Borman stepped up to wear the director's hat with a screenplay written by William Goodhart. However, Exorcist II: The Heretic was so bad that it seemed to have dropped straight from hell. I know that over time, audiences have defended that film and claimed it's not as bad as its reputation, but let's be honest, it was nowhere close to our expectations. But even with Borman's artistic skills and the studio support, what exactly went wrong with the sequel? Let's find out. But before that, here's a quick summary of the movie's plot for those of you who were spared from the horror. Pun intended. This time, the makers chose to put a 16-year-old Regan McNeil in the middle of sci-fi supernatural horror, as if Pazuzu alone wasn't enough to terrorize the little girl. The church assigns Father Lamont to investigate Father Marin's death, who died while exorcising Regan. Lamont then pulls a healing Regan from under Dr. Gene Tusken's care into this shithole of an investigation, uses some high-tech device called the Synchronizer, and gets a vision of Marin in Africa. Lamont realized that Marin successfully freed a boy, Kokumo, from Pazuzu's clutches, and that he had now developed special powers. What on earth were they trying to do? He reached out to Kokumo, got details from him, and returned to the goddamn cursed house in Georgetown with Regan, who, like Kokumo, also has telepathic powers. They confront Pazuzu again, battle a female demon who is Regan's doppelganger, and manage to take the evil forces down. Yep, that's the movie. No comments. Exorcist II was doomed from the very beginning, even before Borman took up the mantle. Why the man decided to get entangled with this film is a different story, which I'll get into later. So the movie was conceived as a low-budget follow-up to the first one by co-producer Richard Lederer, and he didn't even care about coming up with something fresh and elevated. He told his creative team that all the studio and producers wanted was to somehow redo the first movie into the next chapter in the Exorcist universe. So they started from scratch with about $3 million and a rather cynical approach to filmmaking. Reflecting on their initial concept, Lederer explained that the idea was to have the central figure, an investigative priest, interview everyone involved with the exorcism, then fade out to unused footage, unused angles from the first film. Coming back to why Borman decided to direct the movie, firstly, because Sam Osteen never really went ahead with the project, even though he had agreed to do so. When Borman was offered Exorcist II, he accepted, basically wanting to prove a point. He criticized the first film for being extremely violent and torturing an adolescent, aka Linda Blair. According to rumors, he hated the concept so much that when he read the script for The Exorcist, Boorman said that he would never direct something like this, and neither should anyone else. He stated, "I have daughters. I don't want to make a film about torturing a child." He tried to turn The Exorcist from the apparent shock fest it was into a more spiritual venture. Boorman claimed that he was fascinated by the idea of making a metaphysical thriller, which was rooted in goodness, and that convinced him to direct the sequel. He was ready to accept all the hurdles that could come in the way and stated that he had no issues struggling to find a connection back with the audience. He apparently saw it as a chance to make an extremely ambitious movie and take viewers on a cinematic adventure. Boorman called it a riposte to Friedkin's original, which was not really a follow-up. Yeah, right. Not just him, several other actors embarked on this disastrously derailing roller coaster because they regarded Friedkin's work as sadistic and wanted to attack it. Max von Sydow, who played Father Merrin, felt that the 1973 Exorcist was close to what exploitation and child abuse could be and was not interested in coming back into Boorman's project, considering the overall negative impact the first movie had, but did it out of spite. In the end, what Boorman and his company created was not just terrible in itself, but he essentially tainted the brand name of a great movie. Sadly, Boorman could not take the horrible reviews that Exorcist II got. Critics called it the stupidest movie ever made, and that it appeared to be a total ripoff of the original, which made no sense whatsoever. Boorman was broken and didn't even want to talk about how disastrous the opening was for years. Poor man even considered suicide or fleeing to Russia. Let it go, Boorman. Exorcist 2 was a black spot. You are a great filmmaker in your own right. Also, Boorman had a hard time getting the right cast. He was desperate to cast his friend, John Voight, as Father Lamont, with whom he had already worked in Deliverance. Voight was initially interested in the role too, but ultimately had to turn it down, stating the most bizarre thing ever. Voight claimed that he did some digging into Christianity and lost faith in the religion. So now he wanted to become Jewish. Next up, Boorman wanted Christopher Walken to play Father Lamont. But again, a peculiar thing happened during the audition. He got a stomach bug and flunked the screen test. Okay, I'm inclined to believe that if one thing from the first film found its way into the second one, it was the Exorcist curse. Ultimately, the creators decided to go ahead with Richard Burton, who was reeling from his Broadway success in Equus. At first, the on-screen mother-daughter duo Linda Blair and Ellen Burstyn flatly refused to reprise their roles as Regan and Chris MacNeil anymore. However, Linda eventually gave in, seeing the chance she was getting to work with other big-shot actors. She agreed to return on the condition that she wouldn't have to wear the demon makeup again. But Chris could not be convinced at any cost, so the director signed Kitty Wynn to play Sharon Spencer, who went on to play Regan's guardian in New York while being monitored by Jean. When the film finally went onto the floors, the troubles doubled. One of the lead actors of the movie, Lee J. Cobb, died of a heart attack even before Pazuzu was evoked all over again. Linda recalled another close call during this film. The scene where Regan was walking in her sleep and was about to wander off a rooftop was accidentally filmed on the top of a tall building in New York. There was neither any stunt double nor many special effects, so the sequence required Blair to actually stand on the edge of the building, from where she almost fell off. Even John Boorman himself suffered from a near-fatal case of San Joaquin Valley fever, causing production to halt for almost a month. Let's not forget how the movie went through multiple changes in scripts. Over time, Boorman was no longer happy with Goodhart's script, which drew from the theories of the famous Jesuit archaeologist and paleontologist. He wanted Goodhart to rewrite the whole thing by incorporating the concepts of the English screenwriter and director Ross Pope Hallenberg. Understandably, Goodhart was absolutely not ready to compromise with his objectives. Ultimately, Boorman and Pallenberg took matters into their own hands against Goodhart's wishes and rewrote the story, except they were not really sure how to conclude it. Oopsie daisy. The script was being reworked so many times by now that the actors started getting frustrated. Linda gave us quite some insight in various interviews. She disclosed that everyone actually liked Goodhart's take on Exorcist II, but for no valid reason, it was revised almost 5 times, and the final product was nothing like what everyone had in mind. Linda, for one, wanted to get rid of what was happening to this film, but she was already bound by contract to finish her job. In one of the chapters of the 2000 book, The Exorcist Out of the Shadows, by Bob McCade, Linda shared that Exorcist II: The Heretic was one of the greatest disappointments in her career. She even spilled that some major chunks of the movie were in the hands of Pallenberg, and thus he was acknowledged as a second-unit director and a creative associate. Along with the script issues, problems flowed in regarding filming locations. Borman wanted the movie to be primarily shot outside, including in places like the Vatican and Ethiopia. But it's easier said than done. Subsequently, many of the key exterior scenes had to be filmed at the backlot of Warner Brothers Studio. Even the house in Georgetown, where the events of the first Exorcist took place, had to be recreated inside the studio because the makers were denied permission to shoot at the original location. Washington city officials also refused to allow the filming of the real Hitchcock steps, where Father Merrin tripped, and that too had to be replicated. What I think is, since the first Exorcist had its own set of issues and backlash, the authorities weren't too keen on opening up these places again to invite Pazuzu back. All of this led the budget to shoot through the roof, and it ultimately required $14 million for Exorcist II. You'd wish the ordeal ended there, but nope. Borman was pushed even further into chaos. The original footage got oversaturated, and the team had to endure multiple reshoots. Even the climax, which included a swarm of locusts, was a pain in the ass. The insects were being imported from England, but they kept on dying. Over 2,000 locusts were being shipped in, and they continued to perish at a rate of 100 per day. At this point, Exorcist II became an epitome of Murphy's Law. More actors, like Kitty Wynn and Louise Fletcher, aka Jean, started experiencing health issues. And as the final nail in the coffin, chief editor John Merritt walked away from the project. He had to be immediately replaced by Tom Priestley. In the end, Exorcist II turned out to be a spectacular train wreck. Warner Brothers did try to make Exorcist II a big deal and made sure it opened in over 700 theaters in the US and Canada. The first few moments were the only moments of joy the makers experienced. Exorcist II: The Heretic set an opening weekend record with a revenue of over $6 million. But in no time, word of mouth revealed what a debacle it was. Its box office performance began declining, and though the movie managed to log profits in the ledgers, it was nothing compared to the first movie's gross amount. The humiliation for Borman and the team had just begun. Reportedly, people started laughing at the premiere in New York City, and Blatty was, of course, the first person to break into fits of giggles. The man was waiting for this day. John Borman went crazy. He desperately tried to re-edit the movie to salvage it by snipping out moments that turned his dream horror project unintentionally comedic. However, the version that ran in the hometown in the US was ironically the untampered one. Honestly, I feel sad for Borman. The studio chose to cut costs by reusing existing prints and running whatever seemed convenient, while the director was losing his mind trying to somehow make Exorcist II better. Critics made life worse for the already guilty filmmaker. BBC reviewer Mark Kermode claimed that Exorcist II was demonstrably the worst film ever made. He kept on bashing it, saying that the makers decided to take the greatest film ever made and spoil it in every way possible. Neither Kermode nor viewers could forgive Borman for a long time for doing this. However, there was still light at the end of the tunnel. The Oscar-winning filmmaker Martin Scorsese loved Exorcist II. He stated that though he loved the first movie due to his Catholic guilt, The Heretic managed to surpass it. According to him, Borman failed to execute the material as well as he should have, but the movie still deserves a better reception than it got. Even the American critic Pauline Kael supported Borman during this turbulent time in his career. She appreciated the visuals in Exorcist II and was backed by Kim Newman, who praised Ennio Morricone's combination of liturgical and travel music. As of January this year, Exorcist II: The Heretic holds an abominable rating on Rotten Tomatoes with an average of 3.6 out of 10. Finally, where John Boorman had the courage to address his sin of choice, the man accepted a lot of his mistakes. He acknowledged that it all came down to the audience, and no matter how much he wanted to use Exorcist II as a redemption for the darkness propagated by the first installment, fans were enraged at being denied the experience they expected. Over the years, many people have started recognizing the good bits in the movie and that it's not as bad as everyone claims. Rather, its negative reputation preceded it. Many viewers mention that it's somehow better than Exorcist Believer and applaud Boorman's efforts to change the direction of the franchise. Yet the overall consensus is the same. The Heretic was a god-awful watch. So to answer the question, what went wrong with Exorcist II: The Heretic? Frankly, everything. Once the progenitors of the first movie realized that a sequel would do no good, the studio should have picked up the hint and just let Exorcist be. But no, their eyes glittered with greed and rivalry, which not only produced a god-awful film, tarnishing the reputations of Friedkin and Blatty, but also gave a deadly blow to Boorman's career. No one in their right mind should have gone against the landmark movie that the brilliant pair made in 1973. Exorcist II was a failure from the very moment the outrageous idea of this sequel was conceived. Everything was in shambles: the story, dialogue, and actor choices. However, the amount of hatred this movie got could never just be because of production or casting troubles. It was because the makers thought they could control the viewer's mind and mold it to fit their conceptions of what is good and what is bad. I mean, why would you even do that? We liked The Exorcist because it made us uncomfortable and scared the hell out of us. I understand it's baffling, but the human psyche is complicated like that. Every time we go into the theater for a horror flick, we go with the intention of being scared, and for some reason, seek that thrill. It is what it is, Boorman. Your idea of forcefully trying to show us that Friedkin showed something very dark and devilish in the history of cinema was a blunder. It was up to us to decide. A movie trying to repaint the story in an impulsive drive to make it apparently better was the primary reason Exorcist II was a catastrophe. Marvelous verdict. Phew, that was a lot of frustration vented. As a devout fan of the original movie, I couldn't stand the disgrace The Heretic was. There, I said it. However, I genuinely appreciate the hard work that went into making this movie and the expectations that everyone had. It just didn't, let's say, work out in the most appropriate manner. There's no doubt that the studio and Boorman were walking on the wrong path from the very beginning. But I guess it's time we let it go. We probably wouldn't have realized the masterpiece that the first film was had it not been for its successor. That's the only silver lining I can take away from this disaster. Anyway, maybe if we give The Heretic another chance sometime later, we can spot some of its better parts, which are shrouded in a veil of hatred and disgust. Hey, let us know what you think about this movie in the comments below. Was it seriously as bad as it's known to be, or are we being extremely biased? I'll see you in the next one. Bye.